Almighty and ever-living God, source of all wisdom and understanding, be present with those who take counsel in this diocese, in our churches, for the renewal and mission of your church. Teach us in all things to seek first your honor and glory. Guide us to perceive what is right, and grant us both the courage to pursue it and the grace to accomplish it. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen.
So it is good to see you all tonight again. So these sessions have been really wonderful. It's kind of fun for us to see your faces each week. So, and get to know one another. And we hope to do that over the next few weeks. So a few updates or announcements. Next week at 7 o'clock, again, we will have the task force for the way forward. So they will be presenting any updates or handle any questions you may have. So those can be directed to them next week. January, we're going to continue our conversations. And on January 14th, we will have a session led by Kevin Huddleston for treasurers. But I would encourage wardens to join as well, because what they're going to talk about and look at is how do you present a budget that doesn't make the rest of us fall asleep. So I think that that'll probably be an important one for us to kind of look at so you can see how well your treasurers are doing. Then on the 21st, we will have a session to talk about the program report and the new questions and new things to pay attention to, and also to start the conversation about what next. You know, what next for our churches? What have we learned from 2020? What's next for the diocese? All those kinds of things to begin to start those conversations. So that's what we're going to be doing. I see everyone has a name tag, and a name tag you can read. So good point. I had been doing this last time, but it gets a little hard to do. But if you can rename yourself, I'm looking at my screen really quickly, and it looks like everybody, for the most part, has done that. I think we've been doing enough of these Zoom calls that we get that. But it's really helpful to see your names and your faces. So yes, Valerie, that is a good thing. Kevin.
I want to tell the wardens what I told the clergy today, that I found out from CPG, Church Pension Group, that we have an opportunity to apply to CPG for a 4-month waiver on pension payments. There's certain information I need, the title, first, middle, and last name of the clergy and the parish they serve. And then Bishop Miller has agreed to sign the form, and we'll send it in and see if we can get some waivers for pension. It would be January through April. I don't think they'll be retroactive, but I think they will be for the 2021 year. I don't know how well it will work, and I always want to add the caution, if your parish doesn't need that kind of relief. I know that lots of parishes are always looking for relief, but if you don't need it, please don't email me, because I would like to keep it, not every parish in the diocese asking for it. Would probably give us a better chance of getting it approved. So keep that in mind and talk to your clergy.
Yeah, thank you. And if you have any other questions, you can either check with me or Kevin to walk you through that, talk you through that. Anything else, Sarah, that you can think of right now for updates?
I'm so sorry to ask you to repeat that, but what was the question? Or what were you talking about that we could talk to you about? Support for parishes?
The pension.
Go ahead, Peggy.
There is an opportunity for a pension relief for 4 months. And so what we would need you to do is to talk with your clergy person, and then either talk to me or Kevin about that. And so Kevin was just saying there are some parishes that are doing pretty well and actually have a surplus. So believe it or not, and they may not need that, but other parishes are struggling for a variety of reasons, and they may. So talk that through, and if you do.
I do have something.
Okay.
Okay, so we've been having our diocesan services available every Sunday since the fifth Sunday in Lent. And so those will go through December 27th. will be the last one. And December 27th will be a special lessons and carols service that'll be available to everyone in the diocese. And then we're also going to be collecting listings of who's continuing to have online opportunities, and so that people who, for parishes that won't be able to do that, that they can plug in somewhere else in the diocese. So we'll send out a questionnaire for you to fill out about that.
Is there a reason that the diocese isn't continuing on while we're closed?
The overall consensus is that it's time. We've given opportunities for parishes to figure out how to do the technology part of it. We've given opportunity for getting grants for tech equipment and things like that. So that's basically the reason.
Right. Yeah. So we've had the different technology ones, like if you're doing a Zoom, pre-recording, however you're doing that, there are a variety of ways. So we were, and I did can't remember now where I put this, but we did give out about $81,000 in tech grants. So a number of churches have that they may need. So that's wonderful too. I was thinking of something when you were talking and now I forgot.
We're still looking for musicians to record for the last service on December 27th. We need singers and instrumentalists to send in recordings of Lo How a Rose Ere Blooming. There are rules and guidelines and all that kind of stuff. I'll put a link to that in the chat and also in the follow-up email.
Excellent. Good. Okay. All right. I think that those were the updates that we had. Right. Okay, let's get started. So we're here to talk about online meetings, and we have with us, we have our Chancellor, Mark Erhmann, who had been the Vice Chancellor last couple of years maybe. And so now he's the one that can answer questions for us and will give us a little bit of rundown about online meetings and bylaws and how that works. And if there are questions, you could put them in the chat. Sarah, Kevin, and I will be monitoring that. Some questions you may be able to answer, some we may not be able to answer. You may need to go back and look at your bylaws or things like that. So, but he'll give you an overview of what to pay attention to. So use the chat. Like I said, we'll monitor and raise up any questions out of that. And then Melesa Skoglund will be speaking to us about how St. Andrews in Madison they already did their annual meeting, and so how that worked. What they learned, what things went really well, maybe some things they would tweak. Sarah has some information that the ELCA has put out to all of their congregations about online meetings as well. So we do have a lot of information about that, and we'll try to get to that as we can. So I don't know. I think, Mark, you're starting, but maybe that's changed.
No, I can go ahead. Good evening, everybody. For those of you who haven't met me before, I'm Mark Erhmann with Quarles and Brady. My father was a longtime chancellor, so you may remember the last name for those of you who've been around for a while. I just want to provide just a few minutes of general framework on kind of the law behind virtual meetings. And it's really not much different from how you see in a regular corporation. Generally, we'll put aside the kind of the congressional meeting, but any other meeting, board meetings, vestry meetings, whatever, can generally be held remotely under the law, as long as there's not something in the in the articles or the bylaws which says you have to have an in-person meeting. And my experience has been that's relatively rare to have those types of provisions, because normally the articles and bylaws are written in such a way that they're as broad as possible. So to start with the basis that, aside from your annual parish meeting, you can generally hold meetings remotely, and that's fine under the law. The key there, I think, is sort of two parts. One is you've got to make sure the technology is such that everybody can simultaneously hear each other, and most of the platforms we use, they do that fine. And then you also have to be able to kind of transmit information back and forth. So it has to be kind of in a similar format to what you have in an in-person meeting. And my experience has been, we've all done a lot of these Zoom meetings that Zoom and similar platforms work fine for that type of arrangement. As far as notice of those meetings and quorum, they basically work the same as if you had an in-person meeting. So if you have to give, 48 hours notice, you have to give 48 hours notice of a virtual meeting. Same thing with establishing the quorum. And you can establish the quorum a number of different ways. Typically you can kind of, like with the Zoom thing, I can see, there's 41 participants now. I can kind of go through, if I was keeping track of the minutes, I just write down who's all here and determine that we have the quorum or not. So it's the same rules on the, for quorum and notice that you'd have in an in-person meeting. Now with the parish meeting, with the annual meeting is a little different because generally those you need to have a specific provision in your constitution which allows you to hold virtual meetings. Now a lot of parishes I think have adopted a constitution which has it in there, but some haven't. And so what we did, kind of for those of you that attended the annual convention of the diocese, what we did, we actually had an in-person meeting that was only attended by 3 people because we had a quorum requirement of 3 people. So the 3 people met, had an in-person meeting. The sole purpose was to amend the canon to allow a virtual meeting of the convention this year. And so we kind of got around it that way. So we had an in-person meeting, adopted a special, canon that basically said we could have a virtual meeting of the diocese. You could do something similar for your parish meeting if you wanted. A lot of the parishes have pretty low quorum requirements. The other thing is there is a provision in Wisconsin law which we'd want to take a look at to see if that would work for you. But there is a provision which allows you to adopt emergency bylaws if there's a ongoing sort of catastrophe, and I think this would qualify under the law, where you could do an emergency bylaw which allows you to take certain action without an in-person meeting. And the same sort of notice and quorum requirements would apply there. I think the key with any of these sort of virtual meetings is if you're going to be taking a vote, you need to make sure that whatever platform you're using allows you to kind of record the votes and to see who's voting and who's not. And the one sort of unique thing I've noticed is if 2 people are attending kind of at the same computer and they're both voting, you need to have kind of a mechanism for recording both their votes. I think we went through that sort of some issues with the annual convention. So that's kind of an overall background. Really, to answer any specific question, you probably have to look at your individual bylaws and constitution. But most people can kind of go through that fairly easily. But I'd be happy to help out if people have further questions on that.
Would we agree, are we understanding that the state law allows in an emergency for bylaws to allow, do we have to meet? Because every parish probably has this. Ours at St. Mark's specifically says we have to meet on the premises. And we would have to change our bylaws because frankly, even our quorum is more people than we're supposed to have on our church premises.
Mm-hmm. And our bylaws require 30% for quorum, and there's no way that we can get 30% into the building. And Beloit, we don't have a large enough campus that we could have even done that outside at the time that we could have met outside. I mean, we could have today, but you're not going to get people out for a meeting in the middle of the week. And our bylaws specifically say that people must be present. And I've always taken that to mean present in person in order to have an annual meeting.
Well, that's interesting. I think some people have interpreted, maybe that's a liberal interpretation, that present doesn't necessarily mean present in person, but that's a different question. I think there's a possibility you could each take advantage of the emergency bylaw provision. I'd want to probably speak with you offline on that, but Wisconsin does allow for this emergency bylaw provision, which allows you to take certain actions. I think if there's an emergency, this would likely be an emergency. Now, I think it does limit what you can do during the meeting that you call under those emergency bylaws. So you want to make sure it covers sort of your annual meeting. But I think some people have argued that being present doesn't necessarily mean present in person, because there are some bylaws that read you have to be present in person. And that's a distinction being present on a Zoom call.
Okay. We have always said that you can't vote by proxy at an annual meeting, so it would be kind of duplicitous, if you will, in some
Right.
people's eyes, if we suddenly said you could be present just by Zoom without a change to the bylaws. We did change our bylaws for our vestry meetings, but we never changed them for the annual meeting.
Okay.
But is it by proxy if people are there on Zoom, like identified who they are and then voting and that vote can be recorded? I mean, that would not be voting by proxy, would it? Or am I wrong? I mean, I don't know.
No, that's generally not voting by proxy. Proxy is when you give, like if I were to give you my vote at a meeting, you vote as my proxy. But if I'm voting in person at in person meaning live at a Zoom meeting, that would be presumably not a proxy vote. That would be an actual vote.
Well, would it be kosher if we did a mail-in ballot for an annual meeting that was also by Zoom?
Yes, in fact, that's what I didn't mention that, but there is an opportunity what some parishes have done. I'm not sure any of the ones in our diocese, but they've developed a procedure where you could almost like an absentee ballot that they use for election, where you fill it out and then dropped it off at a certain location, the parish or somewhere else, and then that was recorded that way as an actual vote. And they filled it out by hand and then signed it. So that would work.
Okay.
Could you use a combination of those two? So if someone say isn't great with the technology and they're not very comfortable being on Zoom or voting on Zoom, that they could return a ballot, and then as long as you follow those exact same questions, could you have other parishioners who are comfortable participate that way?
I think so,
Is that what
yes.
you're suggesting?
So I mean, as long as someone has the opportunity to vote, to cast a vote either through the drop-in ballot or from voting in the Zoom meeting, I think either one would be effective.
Okay.
I think it would be,
Curious then, oh, go ahead, Ellen, did you have a question?
well, I was just thinking, it seems like it would be very important to have a clerk specifically to record votes if it was online or with ballots. And in addition to somebody recording the minutes, right?
Yes, yes. I think sort of a clerk of the meeting. Well, yeah, you likely have a secretary of the meeting and maybe a clerk of the voting, I think would be both.
Definitely. I don't think a secretary could be writing minutes down and necessarily recording votes.
Do you recommend, or does it make a difference if you record the whole meeting? I mean, is that better or more dangerous, or? I mean, then you'd have a record of it, but.
I think it's fine to record the meeting. I think I would just make sure you tell people that it's being recorded. Because otherwise you can get in trouble if people don't, if they don't know.
Right.
As long as you tell people it's going to be recorded and if anybody's comfortable with that, I think that's fine. And that actually has worked in some cases, because then you can go back and say, okay, I wasn't exactly sure how that was resolved.
How would you recommend on a controversial, possibly a controversial vote, to record anonymous votes?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, and maybe, I don't know, Peg, if you were involved in what we did with the convention, I really wasn't involved in the voting aspect of it, but I believe there's a way you can record a vote without your name being attributed to it. But that I'd have to get into the technology to understand that a little bit better, but I understand.
And I'll speak to that. I'll share what we did to do that technology side.
Okay.
Is there any difference, like if you were to vote via the chat, since you can save those chat files later? On like Zoom, I would, you're
Right.
using Zoom.
I mean, I suppose you could have people place their vote by chat by putting yes and putting into the chat feature. You just have to make sure you record, you got ability to record the votes and how many voted and who voted for and who voted against. And that's sort of the key, is because when you want to go back later to make sure something was approved, you want to make sure you have an accurate count. So whatever you do to make sure you got an accurate count, I think is fine.
And Mark is going to stay with us. So I think now if we turn to Melesa, she may actually answer some of the questions that you have of what they did. Like, how did they even get to, why did they do it online? How did they get to that point? So maybe after Melissa's been able to tell us what St. Andrews has done, then we'll have some questions, but they may be answered. So Melesa, the floor is.
Thank you. Yeah, I hope that sharing what we did at St. Andrews will give a good, perhaps a springboard of ideas of how you might do your online meeting. So we had our online meeting back in November, and just a note of encouragement. It was not as bad as we thought it was going to be, and we were pleasantly surprised how it went and how smoothly it went. So I just want to encourage everyone to take a deep breath, and there are lots of good processes, and we greatly benefited from the work that John Washbush did in organizing some of the voting systems for diocesan convention, and learned a lot from him. So we did several steps to prepare the parish for an online meeting, including a meeting with our parliamentarians to review the bylaws and make sure we are in adherence to the bylaws. We held our annual meeting over Zoom, and as we would any other year, we adhered to what the bylaws say for the norms for publishing notice of the annual meeting, both written publication, spoken announcements, but we had a very thorough, more so than we normally would, information page on our website with every document that was created for the annual meeting, so people had access to that at all times. This was something new to us, so we actually did a special print newsletter that contained all of the documents for the annual meeting. It included the date and time, it included the Zoom link, the agenda, it included the new Zoom procedures, position descriptions for elected positions, everything you see there. And one of the surprising things is this is information that we have available upon request that's printed in the back of the sanctuary, and maybe 5 people take it. This year we had everyone say they actually read the candidate bios and knew who was running and were enthusiastic about that. So that was a surprise in this annual meeting moving online. A big thing for us in preparing was to offer trainings for those who were not comfortable with the technology. They were not required, but they were optional. We held those during our online coffee hours. And then we at St. Andrews do, regardless of pandemic, have absentee ballots available. So we actually made an effort. We have a running list of all of the members of our parish that don't have access to online technology. So we mailed them absentee ballots and then made ballots available upon request to those who would not be joining the online meeting. Like I said, we used Zoom, and you all are here, so you're familiar with it, but you'll need to have a Zoom Pro account likely to make sure that you can extend your meeting for over 40 minutes. And that will allow you to have up to 100 participants on the phone call at the same time. I have, and I'll post it in the chat once I close this PowerPoint, but I've created a Google Drive for you all to use that has this information and all of the documents from our annual meeting that you are welcome to steal, to copy and paste, to edit, and make work in your context if applicable. Meeting management, it was a very different feel, most certainly, and thinking about individuals who would normally walk in and there'd be a hustle and bustle. And there just wasn't that. And so we acknowledged that, but one was asking everyone to maintain their mic muted, except as some of you might have been a part of the diocesan convention, used the method of recognizing nominations for the floor, and anyone who wanted to speak would type into the chat box, rise, and then one of the facilitators would call on them at an appropriate time. And then this was extremely important for us. We had about 6 individuals with the clergy and senior warden included that were helping coordinate the behind the scenes effort of the annual meeting, which I'll get into here in just a second. But we had to have a behind the scenes way for us to communicate. And we did that via a Google Doc. You could do it via text, but it was really helpful to have a way to communicate privately. Another perk to doing the annual meeting this way is people aren't squinting to see financials that are projected on a screen. They can see them clearly on their computer. They can see pictures of the candidates, and people were deeply appreciative of that. And lastly, you're just going to have to explain as you go through every step of the meeting. You will offer trainings if you decide to do that, but you'll still have to explain the voting processes on the day of. Don't assume that people read or attended the trainings. Many hands make light work. And so we found that splitting out the various roles needed for the annual meeting to be extremely helpful in thinking what we needed to make this run smoothly. So a Zoom master. This person was the host of the Zoom call. They had these slide presentations stored on their computer and were able to control those for us. And they were also able to watch and see if someone accidentally unmuted and they were clinking around in their kitchen and it was a distraction. They were able to mute them. We also had individuals who were chat monitors who would watch regularly to see if anyone had actually typed in rise in the box so that we would be sure that they were recognized at the appropriate time. We had ballot counters. Now, these were the only individuals that we had in the same place. They were at the opposite ends of our parish hall masked, but we require in our bylaws that there are multiple eyes tallying the votes. And so we needed those folks to be together. This is a big takeaway that we wish we would have done, is to have a tech troubleshooter for individuals who are not able to get logged onto the meeting. Instead, individuals ended up texting myself, Father Andy, and we were not able to manage that fully on the day of the meeting. So having one contact person on the day of the meeting that people can email or call to help them get into the actual meeting would be a plus. Oops, sorry there. So this is where we were going earlier, voting. How we did this is two-pronged. We used Zoom's polling feature for simple votes that are traditionally within our parish taken by acclamation. So that includes the passing of the previous year's minutes, and we often only have one individual running for senior warden, so we vote them in by acclamation. It's very easy to set up. You can do it in advance of the Zoom meeting. It will display as a pop-up window so people don't have to do anything to leave Zoom, and Zoom will tally those votes for you. Now, for the more complicated votes, the ballots, we used Google Forms, just as was used at the Diocesan Convention. What we did to direct people to those was paste a link to those forms in the chat. The downside to this is that it does require your individuals, your participants, to leave Zoom. When they click the link, it will take them away from Zoom and open up an internet browser. When we did our training sessions, this proved to be a challenge for some of our individuals navigating back to Zoom, but on the day of the annual meeting, we found that those training sessions actually ironed out that kink, that individuals felt confident going into the meeting. You can in Google Forms, so this goes to the individuals sharing the same screen in one household. You can set up a Google form to allow one vote per device, or you can leave it open. And we, in discussion with our parliamentarians, opted to leave that open so that individuals who were sharing the same device could vote. The great thing is also that this can be quickly edited if there is a nomination from the floor, if you need to run into a second ballot, it is very easy to edit on the fly, and you don't have to take a great amount of time to do that. It's pretty simple. The other thing is that you can share the Google form, which allows multiple users, which were our ballot counters, to see the results of that form. It also will record all of the results for you, and you can save that and print it as a document for your church records, which is what we did. And then the ballot counters will add those results to the absentee ballots to the Google form, which for us ended up being the fastest ballot counting process we have ever had at St. Andrews. So you're not counting physical ballots. But again, I think what made this run so smoothly was having the training sessions for individuals who are not comfortable with the technology. Now, just a little side note, we are on Zoom a lot. And it's good to remember that as we go into the annual meetings that we're asking people to join another Zoom call. So we did our best to do our annual meeting, to conduct all the business that was necessary, but we also tried to have fun. This is you sprinkling a little magic into your annual meeting. We had a goofy practice ballot. We had fun images throughout. And at the end, we had a dance party to conclude the annual meeting. So anything that you can do to encourage folks to attend, to make it a fun process, because as you know, we are all living in front of these screens far more than we ever have. And we continuously reminded our folks that there is grace. It won't be perfect, but we will do it together. And we did, and it actually went better than we expected. So, and I will share with you all of those documents that we created, including our procedures for voting that you are welcome to tweak and steal.
Thank you. That was fantastic. I mean, that was really good. And yes, from learning from our annual meeting, which actually that went very well too, and we were pleasantly surprised as well. So questions that you have for Melesa?
I just have a question. Were any of your ballots anonymous so that people wouldn't, the ballot counters wouldn't know who was voting?
Yes, you can set Google Forms to collect email addresses or to not, and we opted not to because that's our tradition to keep anonymous ballots.
A question, Melesa, then, as far as, did you have to do anything, did St. Andrews have to do anything to prepare to have the online, like we were talking about before?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch the.
Well, as far as like having, like we had to do with the, like, was it in your bylaws that you could have, I mean, I'm sure it wasn't that you could have an online meeting, but so did you have to do anything prior to setting this up?
We have very generous bylaws at St. Andrews. So we actually have a clause that say at the very end of our bylaws that essentially says, and if these bylaws are deemed unworkable by the clergy and the vestry, they can be edited with full agreements, or they can be, that's not the right word. Mark, you probably know the right word, but it's not coming to me right now. And also our bylaws dictated that the annual meeting had to be held in a place. And our two parliamentarian lawyers both agreed that a digital Zoom room was a place.
Yeah, that's a good point. Oftentimes bylaws do have a provision which says that they can be amended by a smaller group of people, or sometimes they actually say that if an entity takes an action, that is generally, you know, kind of in good faith, the bylaws are deemed amended to allow for that action. So I would say the law, you know, generally it tries to protect actions taken by entities that act in good faith. And I think particularly with, I'm not sure this has been litigated yet, but particularly with like this pandemic, I think the courts are going to give deference to people that are trying to adopt things in a reasonable way. So I don't get real hung up on form sometimes. It's more the substance of, are you taking it in good faith?
Questions you're thinking about? Let's see.
Don Fleshman asked in the chats, if you need to amend for an online gathering, could you instead amend to meet at another time in the year? I guess that would go to Mark.
Yeah, I think you could. You might still have the same issue though. If it's an amendment, you may need to meet in person to do the amendment. So if your bylaws say you have to meet, you know, the first quarter of the year, let's say, or the, you know, in March, in order to amend that, it's probably the same procedure to amend, you know, to amend that as it is to amend to go to a virtual one.
Mark, I just asked that because it might be simpler in the long run if you're going to have to meet to amend anyway, than to do all the training and try to get folks up to speed on Zoom for, especially a lot of our crowd at the parish format. Like, it might just be easier to say annual meetings maybe at a time when we could meet in person. So
yeah, sure, that you could certainly do that. I mean, you can meet to amend really any provision of the bylaws, including that.
And then there was a question about, to Melesa, how many people did you have at your annual meeting?
We had, I believe, 45 Zoom participants and about 60 individuals, with the spouses being on one account.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
What was your preparation like? Did you have meetings ahead of time to talk about how this was all going to happen, that sort of thing?
We did a lot of verbal announcements, email announcements, but as far as developing the process, so much of it was taken from diocesan convention that it was myself, Andy, and our senior warden consulting, and then running with our parliamentarians to make sure we are in adherence to our bylaws. I don't know if that answers your question, if that's what you're wondering about, Tom.
Yeah, I think that does. Thank you.
So it looks like this is a question for you, Mark. What if you don't achieve a majority present? From Ellen.
So if you need a majority to have a quorum, and you don't have a majority present, then I think you can't really legally hold the meeting. Now you presumably could amend the bylaws to lower the quorum requirement to a lower percentage, but you need to have a quorum, I think, present, whether you do it virtually or in person, for the meeting to be validly held.
Well, my question is, if you don't have a majority showing up via the Zoom or ballots, because we do have a number of older members, can you redo an annual meeting in some way? Our bylaws don't provide for that.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think there's maybe I misunderstood the question. So there's a distinction between a quorum and the vote required to pass the resolution.
Right.
Typically, if you have quorum present, then a majority of the people present at the meeting can pass the resolution. Now, your bylaws might say you need a majority, even if it's if you have fewer than that for quorum. So if someone said they needed 30% to have a quorum, and if their bylaws say you need a majority to pass it, that would really only mean you need 15% approval, because if you have 30% to get a quorum and you need 15% to pass the resolution. So you didn't really have to look at your bylaws and see what it said. It would be unusual for the bylaws to say you need more than, the quorum's a lower standard than what it's needed to pass. But once you have a quorum, the meeting's validly held, and then you just have to look at what approval threshold you need to pass the resolution.
Okay, all right.
All right, so let's see, Jason has one. If our bylaws say the meeting must be held in the church, but we do not specify that the voting members be present in person, can I hold a meeting in church on Zoom?
Yeah, I guess I would assume that means as long as one person's in the church hosting the Zoom meeting, that would be sufficient to satisfy that requirement. And in St. Andrews, it sounds like they had two people, actually had two people at the church counting the ballots. So I think that would be fine.
And St. Matthew says the definition of the quorum shall consist of the voting members present.
So I guess I'd have to look at the provision, but if that means that like every voting member must be present to have a quorum, then I think, that would sort of be a little unusual, but if that's what it says, then you really need to have every voting member present to have a quorum. Now, what I think they mean, I'm guessing what they mean is whichever voting members show up at that meeting, that's your quorum. Because it wouldn't really make sense to have a quorum mean 100% of the people that have it.
See if I missed anything, or if, I know there's a lot, so you maybe are thinking of another question.
Huh.
All right, let's see. So St. Paul's, our quorum consists of a majority of qualified voters.
Okay, right. So in that case, however many qualified voters you have, as long as you have the majority of them present either in person or through a Zoom platform, that would be good. And then presumably whatever action taken at the meeting would only require a majority of those present at the meeting, not a majority of all the voters.
Okay, so that will be our challenge, I think, to get a majority. Yep, we'll do it.
So yes, Sarah's asking if there are any parishes here that don't have a priest at the time. So Ellen from St. Paul's in Watertown,
Yep.
that
Right.
they don't. I've got to look. Who else here doesn't have a priest? Anybody? Not on the screen. Ron, yeah, Ron Johnson from Menominee Falls right now.
Good Shepherd.
Good Shepherd, yeah. So do you have a specific question, Sarah, maybe for them, or just wondering?
Well, I'm just wondering because it seems like the priest and the senior wardens and parliamentarians are pulling these annual meetings together. And so we don't have a priest as a leader.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just going to be up to the vestry to figure this out.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And
Amen.
So we can put you in touch with Connie and Buzz. No, I heard there's Buzz. I see her. There are a couple people that have done this for a while. They've been without a priest for I don't want to say how long because they're going to be upset. So for a while. So they can definitely be helpful. So I'll put you in touch with them.
Thank you.
And I mean, we at the Sarah and Peggy and I will be glad to help if we can.
And Sarah, we should talk,
Mhm.
right? Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, we had started the wardens, we had wardens, actually, this came out of that group. So we had wardens
Yeah.
that didn't have clergy. And then Sarah, you guys, right after we kind of switched to having all wardens into this. So you really didn't have an opportunity to meet some of the others. But yes, there are, and a few others too. So maybe we can kind of connect with a few other people that can.
Yeah, it was good. It was helpful.
Mhm,
Definitely.
mhm.
Someone had a question on, I think, Anita, could you send out absentee ballots? Yes, you can. I believe you can have people vote either through the absentee ballot or through the the Zoom feature. And usually, unless your bylaws say something unusual, if someone casts an absentee ballot and actually drops it off in person, they're counted for purposes of the quorum. So even though they're not at the Zoom meeting, their ballot counts for purposes of the quorum. So if people are more comfortable just filling out their ballot and dropping it off before the meeting, they could do that, presumably. And then actually they could come to the meeting and vote and then revoke their ballot if they want. I mean, it's sort of similar to the election, really. You could either drop off your ballot ahead of time or you can vote in person.
Mhm.
Someone said, can they mail in ballots? I don't see why not. Again, unless your bylaws prohibit that, as long as you have a vote in hand that, because by casting the vote, they're usually deemed there for purposes of the quorum. So I think the key would be to make sure it gets there, before the meeting.
Okay. I don't want to end if you still, what I'm thinking of, if Ellen, Buzz, Sarah, Derek, is there anyone else that's without clergy? So I'm going to ask you to stay behind.
Jim Merrill is not here tonight, but from St. Mark's and Beaver Dam.
Yeah, I meant who's on here tonight, because what I'm going to ask you to do is when other people leave is to stay.
Okay.
And then I can introduce you to Sarah and Derek, because Derek is a junior warden up in at St. Boniface as well.
Okay.
Does anyone else have a question? Well, you have given us a lot of information, and Melesa, thank you for all of the documentation and all of that. So if you have any questions, check them out. That is wonderful. And the slides and everything, I think it does put a little bit of, have some fun with this. I tell people too, just be kind to each other. The grace that's there. And so have some fun with it. So thank you for that. That's a good reminder. When will the slides be available? I think they're available right away. Yeah, I think we'll have them for you. Mark, thank you. People may have other questions later, but I bet they're going to look at their bylaws. So we always kind of look at that like, oh, I should really look at our bylaws.
If you want to share my email with I don't know who's all on but if you want to share my email with the group, they can contact me independently if they want.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you. Well, all right. If there isn't, we didn't miss anything else, did we, Sarah, from the questions? Because I think we're good. So if those that I asked to stay after school would please just stay on, we'll do that. So Derek and Sarah, along with Ellen and Buzz, will be great. So thank you, everyone. We will see you next week on the 17th, 7 o'clock.
Thank you. Peggy, would you like me to continue the recording?
Oh, no, thank you.